Madame Celeste Dupont, in a small Louisiana town, was a woman whose childhood was steeped in poverty and superstition. Her mother, Iette, was a practitioner of voodoo, while her father, Jean-Paul, was a charming con artist who drifted in and out of their lives. From an early age, Celeste learned the art of reading people, picking up on subtle cues and body language that would later serve her well in her chosen profession. As a child, Celeste was often left to her own devices, spending hours exploring the bayou and listening to the stories of local elders. She was particularly drawn to tales of the supernatural, soaking up every bit of folklore and mysticism she could find. It was during this time that she first claimed to have visions, describing vivid dreams that seemed to predict future events. As she entered her teenage years, Celeste's natural beauty and newfound abilities made her the talk of the town. She began to hold seances for her classmates, charging small fees for her services. It was during one of these sessions that she met Thomas, a charismatic drifter who recognized her talent for deception. Together, they embarked on a series of small-time cons across the South, posing as faith healers and fortune-tellers. Their partnership, both romantic and professional, lasted for several years until a scam went wrong. Thomas was arrested, but Celeste managed to evade the authorities. It was then that she decided to reinvent herself, dyeing her hair and adopting the persona of Madame Celeste, the mysterious psychic from Europe. With her new identity, Celeste moved from town to town, honing her craft and building a reputation. She learned to cold read, manipulate emotions, and exploit the grief and desperation of her clients. Her cons grew more elaborate and her fees more exorbitant. It was in Aviara Cove that Madame Celeste set up her most ambitious operation yet. Little did she know that her pursuit of true supernatural power would lead her down a path of no return, culminating in a crime that would shake the foundations of her carefully constructed world. Robert and Elizabeth Morin were the epitome of old money and social grace. Their sprawling estate on the outskirts of Aviara Cove was a testament to generations of wealth accumulated through shrewd investments and inherited fortune. Robert, in his early 60s, had made a name for himself in the world of finance, while Elizabeth was known for her philanthropic efforts and impeccable taste. The Morins had moved to Aviara Cove 5 years ago, seeking a quieter life away from the bustle of New York City. They quickly became pillars of the community, hosting lavish charity galas and contributing generously to local causes. Their fairy tale romance and seemingly perfect life were the envy of many in town. However, beneath the polished exterior lay a web of secrets and unfulfilled desires. Robert, despite his business acumen, harbored a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had worked for. This paranoia led him to make increasingly risky investments, seeking to multiply his wealth to ensure his legacy. Elizabeth, on the other hand, struggled with the loss of her twin sister in a car accident years ago, an event that left her with a profound sense of guilt and a desperate need for closure. It was Elizabeth who first heard of Madame Celeste through the town's gossip mill. Initially skeptical, she found herself drawn to the idea of communicating with her lost sister. Robert, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the notion of psychics and mediums as nonsense. But as he watched his wife sink deeper into melancholy, he reluctantly agreed to accompany her to a session with the renowned psychic. The Morins' decision to seek out Madame Celeste would prove to be fateful. Their wealth, combined with their emotional vulnerabilities, made them the perfect marks for the cunning psychic. The first meeting between Madame Celeste and the Morins took place on a crisp autumn evening. As the couple entered the dimly lit parlor, they were immediately enveloped by the heady scent of incense and the soft glow of candles. Madame Celeste, resplendent in a deep purple gown adorned with silver stars, greeted them with a knowing smile that seemed to pierce their very souls. Elizabeth, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and trepidation, spoke first. "Madame Celeste, I've heard so much about you, and we hope you can help us." The psychic's gaze lingered on Elizabeth, noting the slight tremor in her voice and the way she clutched her husband's arm. Without missing a beat, Madame Celeste responded, "The spirits have been expecting you, my dear. I sense a great loss in your past, a piece of yourself torn away." Elizabeth gasped, her grip on Robert tightening. Robert, meanwhile, remained stoic, his skepticism evident in the tight set of his jaw. Madame Celeste turned her attention to him, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "And you, sir, carry the weight of many responsibilities. The future weighs heavily on your mind. Over the next hour, Madame Celeste wove a tapestry of half-truths and educated guesses, expertly reading the couple's reactions and tailoring her revelations to their responses. She spoke of Elizabeth's sister, describing her with just enough accuracy to be convincing, and hinted at messages from beyond the veil. For Robert, she alluded to business opportunities and potential pitfalls, her vague prophecies playing into his financial anxieties. By the end of the session, Elizabeth was in tears, feeling a connection to her lost sister that she hadn't experienced in years. Even Robert, despite his initial skepticism, found himself unsettled by the accuracy of some of Madame Celeste's insights. As they left, both agreed to return for further consultations. Over the next few weeks, the Morans became regular visitors. Madame Celeste carefully cultivated their trust, each session revealing just enough to keep them coming back for more. She began to suggest more elaborate rituals and expensive offerings to enhance their connection to the spirit world. For Elizabeth, these sessions became a lifeline, a way to assuage her guilt and find peace. Robert, while still harboring doubts, couldn't deny the positive change in his wife's demeanor. Slowly but surely, Madame Celeste was weaving her web around the wealthy couple, drawing them deeper into her world of shadows and secrets. Little did the Morans know that with each visit, they were inching closer to a fate far darker than they could have ever imagined. Madame Celeste's demands became more extravagant with each passing day. She insisted on rare crystals and precious metals for energy focus, exotic herbs and incense for purification, and even suggested that the Morans donate significant sums to various charitable causes to curry favor with the spirits. In reality, these donations were funneled into offshore accounts controlled by Celeste herself. The psychic's manipulation extended beyond mere financial exploitation. She began to insinuate herself into every aspect of the Morans' lives. Late-night phone calls became common, with Celeste claiming to have urgent messages from beyond. She advised Robert on business decisions, conveniently aligning her visions with her own financial interests. For Elizabeth, she became a confidant, slowly isolating her from friends and family under the guise of spiritual protection. As her influence grew, so did Madame Celeste's obsession with the occult. The rituals she performed for the Morans became darker, incorporating elements of blood magic and sacrificial rites. She spoke of ancient powers and forbidden knowledge, her eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on madness. The Morans, too deep in her thrall to see the danger, followed her lead without question. Behind closed doors, Celeste pored over arcane texts, convinced that she was on the brink of unlocking true supernatural power. Her sessions with other clients became perfunctory, her focus entirely on the Morans and the potential they represented. In her twisted mind, their wealth and willingness to follow her every command made them the perfect vessels for a grand ritual she was planning. As her plans took shape, Madame Celeste began to lay the groundwork for her ultimate con. She spoke to the Morans of a great awakening that would require them to sever all ties with their old life. Under her guidance, they began to liquidate assets and make preparations to transfer large sums of money. Robert, his business acumen clouded by Celeste's influence, failed to see the red flags that would have been obvious in any other circumstance. Elizabeth, lost in her grief and the promise of eternal connection with her sister, was willing to go to any lengths Madame Celeste suggested. The stage was set for a tragedy of epic proportions. Madame Celeste, her grip on reality slipping with each passing day, had convinced herself that the murder of the Morans would be the key to unlocking limitless power. She meticulously planned every detail, from the ritual site to the method of disposing of the bodies. As the night of the Great Awakening approached, an air of anticipation settled. The Morans, unaware of the fate that awaited them, prepared for what they believed would be a spiritual rebirth. At precisely midnight, the Morans arrived, dressed in the white robes Celeste had provided. Their eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they followed the psychic through the house and into the backyard. Robert clutched a briefcase containing documents for the transfer of their wealth, a necessary step for spiritual unburdening, as Celeste had explained. As they entered the clearing, Elizabeth gasped at the elaborate setup. A large pentagram had been drawn on the ground with what appeared to be ash, surrounded by flickering candles and strange symbols. At its center stood the altar, adorned with crystals, feathers, and a large silver chalice. Madame Celeste began the ritual, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic chant. The words, a mix of Latin and gibberish, washed over the Morans, lulling them into a trance-like state. As the chanting intensified, Celeste instructed the couple to lie down within the pentagram, their heads toward the altar. With practiced movements, she bound their wrists and ankles with silk cords, explaining that it was to anchor their spirits during the transition. The Morans offered no resistance, their minds clouded by the intoxicating blend of incense and blind faith. As the ritual reached its climax, Madame Celeste's demeanor changed. The mask of the benevolent spiritual guide slipped away, revealing the cold, calculating eyes of a killer. From beneath the altar, she retrieved an ornate dagger, its blade glinting in the moonlight. Elizabeth was the first to realize something was terribly wrong. She began to struggle against her bonds, her voice rising in panic. Robert, shaken from his stupor by his wife's cries, demanded to know what was happening. But it was too late. With swift, brutal efficiency, Madame Celeste plunged the dagger into Elizabeth's chest. The woman's scream was cut short as blood bubbled from her lips. Robert roared in anguish and fury, thrashing wildly against his restraints. Celeste turned to him, her face spattered with his wife's blood, and brought the dagger down again and again. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the gurgling of the dying couple, Madame Celeste began to collect their blood in the silver chalice. Her movements were methodical, almost reverent, as she muttered incantations under her breath. She truly believed that this act of supreme sacrifice would grant her the power she had long sought. As life ebbed from the Morans, Madame Celeste completed her grisly task. She dipped her fingers into the blood-filled chalice and began to draw symbols on her own skin, her eyes wild with a terrible ecstasy. In her madness, she failed to notice the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The ritual concluded, Celeste stood over the bodies of her victims, arms outstretched, waiting for the rush of power she was certain would come. But as the minutes ticked by, all she felt was a growing sense of panic and the cold realization of what she had done. With trembling hands, she began the process of cleaning up the crime scene. She had planned for this, but the reality of disposing of two bodies was far more daunting than she had anticipated. As she dragged the corpses toward a pre-dug grave deeper in the woods, her mind raced with plans to secure the Morans' wealth and flee Aviara Cove. In the pale light of dawn, Madame Celeste surveyed the scene of her gruesome crime. The once pristine clearing was now a tableau of horror, with blood-soaked earth and the lingering stench of death. She had managed to bury the bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Moran in the deep grave she had prepared, but evidence of the murder still littered the area. With a growing sense of panic, Celeste began the painstaking process of erasing all traces of the night's events. She gathered the blood-stained robes, the ritual implements, and the now empty chalice, stuffing them into heavy garbage bags. The pentagram was scuffed out, leaves and branches scattered over the disturbed earth. As she worked, Celeste's mind raced. She needed to establish an alibi, to create a narrative that would explain the Morans' sudden disappearance. Rushing back to the house, she showered, scrubbing away every speck of blood and dirt. She then set about creating a paper trail, forging emails and documents that suggested the couple had been planning a secret getaway. Using the information she had gleaned from her sessions with the Morans, Celeste began the complex process of accessing their accounts. She had coerced them into sharing passwords and account details under the guise of spiritual unburdening. Now, those same details would allow her to siphon off their considerable wealth. As morning turned to afternoon, Celeste made a series of calls. To the Morans' housekeeper, she explained that the couple had left for an emergency business trip. To their few close friends, she expressed concern that she hadn't heard from them since their last session. She even went so far as to call the local police, reporting that the Morans had missed an important appointment and weren't answering their phones. But even as she wove her web of lies, Celeste could feel it all unraveling. The hasty cleanup of the crime scene, the rushed cover-up, it all felt inadequate. She hadn't anticipated the overwhelming guilt and fear that now consumed her. Every car that drove past the house, every unexpected noise, made her jump. As evening approached, A knock at the door sent Celeste into a panic. It was Detective Malika Collins, responding to the missing persons report Celeste herself had filed. The psychic invited her in, forcing a calm demeanor as she recounted her concerns about the Morans. Detective Collins listened intently, her keen eyes taking in every detail of Celeste's home and behavior. She asked pointed questions about the couple's last known whereabouts and their relationship with Celeste. Though the psychic maintained her composure, she could sense the detective's suspicion. As Collins left, promising to keep Celeste informed of any developments, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on the self-proclaimed psychic. She realized that her pursuit of power and wealth had led her down a path from which there was no return. The once confident Madame Celeste was now a woman on the edge, waiting for the inevitable moment when her crimes would be discovered. Detective Malika Collins had been with the Aviara Cove Police Department for 15 years, and something about the Morans' disappearance didn't sit right with her from the start. Her instincts, owned by years on the force, told her that Madame Celeste knew more than she was letting on. In the days following her initial visit, Collins dove deep into the investigation. She interviewed the Morans' friends, colleagues, and household staff. A pattern quickly emerged. In the months leading up to their disappearance, the couple had become increasingly isolated, their behavior erratic and secretive. Collins's attention focused on their connection to Madame Celeste. She discovered that large sums of money had been flowing from the Morans' accounts to various shell companies and offshore banks. When she traced these transactions, she found a complex web of financial maneuvers that all seemed to lead back to the psychic. Intrigued by Celeste's background, Collins began to dig into her past. She uncovered a trail of complaints and suspicions spanning several states, all related to psychic fraud and con artistry. The detective realized she was dealing with a sophisticated criminal, one who had managed to stay one step ahead of the law for years. As Collins delved deeper, she started interviewing other clients. Many spoke of the psychic with reverence, but a few shared stories of feeling manipulated and pressured to part with large sums of money. One client, an elderly widow, tearfully recounted how Celeste had tried to convince her to sell her home and invest the proceeds in a spiritual cleansing ritual. The detective's suspicions grew when forensic analysis of the Morans' computer revealed deleted emails discussing a Great Awakening ritual with Madame Celeste. The language used was cryptic, but it was clear that the couple had been planning something significant for the night they vanished. Armed with this information, Collins obtained a warrant to search Celeste's property. As her team combed through Celeste's home and the woods behind it, the detective couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering something terrible. Little did she know that buried deep in those woods lay the gruesome truth of what had really happened to Robert and Elizabeth Moran. The search of Madame Celeste's property yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Hidden in a false bottom of her antique writing desk, detectives discovered a journal detailing her deepening obsession with the occult and her plans for the Morans. The basement revealed a makeshift laboratory where she had been experimenting with various hallucinogenic compounds, likely used to enhance her client's spiritual experiences. But it was the discovery in the woods that broke the case wide open. A cadaver dog brought in to search the expansive property alerted to a spot deep in the forest. As police excavated the area, they unearthed the badly decomposed bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Moran. Detective Collins, watching as the bodies were exhumed, felt a mix of vindication and horror. Her instincts had been right, but the truth was far more gruesome than she had imagined. Forensic analysis would later reveal traces of the ritual, including remnants of candle wax and unfamiliar herbs on the victim's remains. With this damning evidence in hand, Collins moved to arrest Madame Celeste. But the psychic, perhaps foreseeing the net closing around her, had fled. As the search for Celeste continued, Collins pieced together the full extent of her crimes. Financial records showed that she had managed to transfer millions from the Morans' accounts in the days following their murder. Interviews with other clients revealed a pattern of exploitation going back years. The detective also uncovered Celeste's true identity as Celeste DuPont, connecting her to unsolved cases of fraud and theft across multiple states. It became clear that the Moran murders were the culmination of a lifetime of increasingly bold and dangerous cons. Law enforcement tracked Celeste to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. As police surrounded the property, Celeste attempted to flee into the woods. In a tense standoff, Collins confronted the self-proclaimed psychic, who was now a shell of her former confident self. "Madame Celeste, or Celeste Dupont, your crimes have caught up with you," Collins called out. "There's nowhere left to run." For a moment, it seemed Celeste might try to fight or flee, but then, as if all the fight had left her at once, she sank to her knees on the damp forest floor. As Collins approached to make the arrest, Celeste looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of defeat and something else, a lingering madness that sent chills down the detective's spine. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, from financial records showing the systematic draining of the Moran's accounts to the chilling contents of Celeste's personal journals. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the murders, while psychologists attempted to unravel the defendant's complex psyche. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Thomas, Celeste's former partner. He provided insight into her early cons and the evolution of her tactics, painting a picture of a woman whose greed and delusions of grandeur had spiraled out of control. Celeste's defense team attempted to argue that she was not of sound mind, presenting evidence of her deep-seated belief in the occult and her conviction that the murders were part of a genuine ritual. They portrayed her as a victim of her own delusions, manipulated by the very forces she thought she was channeling. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that Celeste's apparent madness was intertwined with a calculating intelligence. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, citing the heinous nature of the crimes and Celeste's lack of genuine remorse, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole.